Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another Discovery Live Ask an Expert. If this is your first time joining us, my name is Ben Gondres, and I am the Fort Collins Museum of Discovery's OtterBox Digital Dome Theater Manager. And it's my pleasure to get to host these programs and bring these amazing experts right here in our community to you through this platform. And so, yeah, tonight we've got another event in our series centered around mental health. If you were not aware, we are currently hosting a traveling exhibition called Mental Health Mind Matters that deals with the issues of mental health and destigmatizing the conversation around mental health. And so we thought we would bring on experts related to mental health to get some questions answered about what is mental health and how it affects all kinds of different people. And so with that said, we've got a couple of experts here from the Child Trauma and Resilience Assessment Center at CSU, and I'll bring them on in just a moment. But before I do, I did want to mention that if you are enjoying tonight's program or any of the programs that we're doing, please do consider donating to the museum. We're a nonprofit organization, and we do rely on support from our community to continue to bring these types of programs to all of you. And so you can visit our website at fcmod.org/donate to do that online. Or if you're watching on Facebook Live, you can also just click the little donate button that should be right below the video. All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and bring on our experts. And tonight we have Stephanie and Chelsea, again from the Child Trauma and Resilience Assessment Center at CSU. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having us, Ben.
Yeah.
We're excited to be here.
Awesome. So why don't we start off and just do some introductions so that people can get to know you a little bit better. And yeah, why don't you just tell us a little bit about who you are, the work that you're doing, and maybe just a little bit of your background and how you got to where you are. So Stephanie, why don't you kick us off?
So I am a marriage and family therapist working at the Child Trauma and Resilience Assessment Center. I've been working at the center for about the last 3.5 years now. Did my training in marriage and family therapy at CSU, and have been working at the Child Trauma and Resilience Assessment Center for the last couple of years. The work that we do at the center is really in partnership with Larimer County Child Protection, and they're kind of our biggest partners in the county, but we also partner with many community partners. So with the schools, we partner with the justice system, community providers and organizations. And really our focus of our work is on doing developmental trauma assessments, which we'll talk a little bit, I think, later, but also around doing some community education about trauma-informed care, trying to build a collaborative effort around implementing trauma-informed care in Larimer County as a community, and then doing kind of broader outreach into other communities in Colorado to also kind of spread this work and share it with and kind of build a network of communities who are doing trauma-informed work in their areas.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Stephanie. And it looks like we lost Chelsea. Maybe she'll rejoin us here in just a moment. But yeah, let's, I guess, just go ahead and dive into it. So when talking about childhood trauma, can you talk a little bit about what exactly we're talking about when we say complex childhood trauma or some of these other terms that we use to refer to these issues?
Sure. So I think, the word trauma is used widely to mean a lot of different things. And so, there can be, when we think about trauma, what we think about is really stress. And so, everybody kind of has stressors in their everyday lives. And so we might go through a stressor that is manageable and we can handle it. And then, it might kind of shock our system for a second, but we can kind of handle it and come back to baseline. Sometimes we go through traumas that are bigger than that, a car accident or, loss of a loved one. And still in those moments, they're a big shock to our system. it might take a little longer and there could be lasting impacts, but eventually sometimes we can come down from those kind of with, other people who can support us and kind of with our own resilience. And we talk a lot about resilience in our center too. And I think you probably have a lot of questions that we can talk about resilience. But
yeah,
then there's this kind of thought about complex, ongoing stressors that, so when we talk about complex, it's stressor after stressor after stressor. It's kind of a pile up of stressors. And when we talk about complex trauma in the context of the work that we do, we're really talking about these experiences of stress kind of within the caregiving system, in the family, the kind of system that's supposed to keep a child safe, and that have these stressors over time where they start to overwhelm someone's ability to be able to manage them. And then often when they happen in that kind of caregiving system, what makes them complex is that there aren't those kind of caring adults to kind of come in often and support a child. So they're kind of trying to either make sense or deal with the situation on their own, which can kind of lead to these lasting impacts. And so when we talk about complex, it's kind of the pile-on of stressors, plus these kind of overwhelming and lasting impacts that can ripple into the future.
Excellent. Chelsea, I think we lost you for just a moment there, but
I'm so sorry about that. I was having tech issues, couldn't hear everyone, so I apologize, but I can introduce myself if you'd like.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
So thanks for having us here. I'm Chelsea Klein. I'm also a clinician with my colleague staff at the Child Trauma and Resilience Assessment Center. We go by CTRAC for short over at Colorado State University. I have a master's degree in human development family studies with a specialization in marriage and family therapy that I got over at CSU before I started working at CTRAC full time, and love being able to talk about the impacts of trauma, especially like Steph was talking about complex trauma within that caregiving or family system, as well as resilience. So like Steph said, a lot of our focus is on areas of resilience. How can we build resilience in children and families that we work with? How can we build resilience in communities? And how can we build resilience in ourselves as workers doing this trauma work on a daily basis as well? So yeah, I think that's just a little bit about me.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you so much for being here. And also I wanted to mention for anyone out there watching the program tonight, if you do have questions for our experts tonight, feel free to leave those in the comments below and we will relay those questions and get you guys some answers. So yeah. All right. So you guys both talked a bit about resilience, and I just wanted to get some idea about what exactly you mean when we're talking about resilience, especially in this focus of mental health and trauma. What is resilience?
So I guess, and Chelsea, chime in at any time, what I think about resilience, kind of the short answer that I think about is really that ability to weather the storms in our life, the ability to bounce back when difficult things happen. And, there used to kind of be this thought around resilience that, there's some, a resilience gene. So it was like you either had it or you didn't, and you were born with resilience or you won't. But now what we know is that that's not the case. That resilience is something that can be grown and developed and fostered within people, over the course of their lifetime. So not only just children, but then also even into adulthood. So all of us can grow and build our resilience. And I think that what we really lean into in the work that we do at CTRAC is that resilience is the thing that gives us hope, and hope for healing and positive outcomes for kids and families. And so really, yeah, I think it's, the simple answer is the ability to weather the storms of life.
Yeah, and something when we look at areas of resilience, when we do assessment with kids and families, we're really looking at one of the biggest one is relationships. And especially for our kids, when they've gone through that complex trauma, they often have trauma, abuse, neglect, or just even difficulties, or intergenerational traumas or difficulties in the family that they face. And so we see a lot of kids who don't always have a safe, healthy person in their life to help support them and weather that storm. So relationships is a really big one. The research is really clear that even just one significant supportive relationship, whether that's a parent, a mentor, a teacher, it really makes a huge difference in the amount of resilience and the amount of stress that we're able to manage. So relationships really help us to buffer that stress that comes from hardship. So relationships is a big one that we look for. Not only the quantity of those relationships, but the quality. Does a child feel like they can trust that person, be themselves with that person? So we look at that relatedness piece. We also look at things like regulation. How well is someone able to manage their emotions, identify what they're feeling, be able to express that in healthy ways, be able to cope in healthy ways. We see a lot of kids and clients who cope with through addiction or substance use, through self-harm, a lot of anxiety and depression. And so looking at how well is somebody able to really express those emotions, be able to manage that internal turmoil, and then lean on people to kind of help with that piece as well. And then we also look at mastery. So does somebody have confidence in their abilities to do things, whether that's school or daily functioning, a job, whatever they need to do? Do they have those abilities in place and opportunities to support those abilities? Do they have confidence in themselves, hope for the future, optimism? A lot of times trauma can really impact how we feel about ourselves, the opportunities that we can see or don't see for ourselves. So that's that bit with mastery that we're really looking at too. Do they have a sense of who they are, what their values, their beliefs? Can they see or have a hope for their future? So those are a couple of the areas that we're looking at when we're talking about resilience. And a lot of the recommendations that we make in our assessments and consultations are how can we really navigate and name the areas of resilience this kid already has, and then build on those. And then maybe there's some areas that they might be lacking. So how can we really get them involved in the community? How can we get them connected to services, resources that are really going to build up those areas of resilience? So not only treating the areas of impact, but also really highlighting and building on those resilient areas too.
Excellent. So you also mentioned a little bit before that some of these traumas can have lasting impacts. And I think I read somewhere as well that, childhood trauma is perhaps the leading cause of adult death. Can you talk to that a little bit and how we're seeing those lasting impacts and what kind of studies are going into that?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people's maybe introduction to trauma, or kind of the impact of trauma, has been through the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experience study that came out of Kaiser Permanente in the late 1990s. And so for anybody watching who kind of doesn't know or hasn't heard of this study, Nadine Burke-Harris, who is now the California Surgeon General, has a great TED Talk that I think is titled How Childhood Trauma Affects Across the Lifespan, or something like that. And so for anybody watching, it's a great introduction to kind of what the impact of trauma is. But, so she was a pediatrician, and she was doing work with kids and families, and kind of what she found working in the neighborhood where she was working is that, there's so many kids coming in with kind of chronic health problems, and adults coming in with chronic health problems. And what she started to kind of find out through conversations was that kind of a connecting factor between all of these people was their experiences in childhood. So these, what they call adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, where, experiences of abuse and neglect, experiences of separation through a caregiver, whether that is through incarceration, divorce in families, parental substance use, all sorts of issues that can impact kids, all sorts of traumas that can impact kids. And so, as kind of the physicians who were working in her area started to put the pieces together, they did a really robust, a big study with over 17,000 participants. And what they found is actually these adverse childhood experiences are quite common. And so a little over 2/3 of the population has at least one adverse childhood experience, and 12.5% of the population has 4 or more.
Wow.
And so, you know, as they started to kind of dig into making the connections between these experiences and health outcomes as kids become adults, what they found is that the more ACEs that you have, the more mental and physical health impacts that they see long-term in people. And so, you know, as they started to kind of look into like, what are the levers that are making that happen? Some of that is, like Chelsea alluded to earlier, talked about, was, you know, these risk behaviors that are trying to, you know, kind of cope with some of the impacts of trauma. So substance use is one, you know, that kind of comes to mind. But then also, you know, so alcohol, drugs, or smoking, kind of as a risk behavior that is adopted, kind of cope or deal with the traumas. But then also, even when you take out those risk factors, there still are medical impacts that they see, long-term physical health impacts. So increased risk of lung cancer, increased risk for diabetes, increased risk for heart disease, all of these kind of things, even controlling for smoking and substance uses. And so really, you know, as they kind of make the connections there, when you have that kind of chronic activation of your stress response system, so as you think about, like, in childhood, so many stressors coming in, and that chronic stress building up without being able to flush those stress hormones out of your body, so things like cortisol or adrenaline, those kind of stress hormones, and the more they build up in your body, the more that impacts your health. And so long term, you start to see these physical health impacts. And it's cumulative, you know, so the more ACEs that you have, the worse the health outcomes actually are. And, you know, as you were saying, Ben, like what they found is that for adults who have 4 or more of these ACEs, that's kind of a critical cutoff, but 4 or more of these ACEs, lifespans can start to shorten as much as 20 years. And so unfortunately, you know, the physical health impacts do add up, whether that is through kind of that chronic stress hormones or these stress behaviors and the mental health piece and suicide and all of those kind of things that can be impacted. And so yeah, absolutely, there's kind of both the health piece, but then also even the long-term impacts on relationally, or, you know, your sense of self, sense of the world, those kind of things can be impacted too.
Especially in childhood, when we have so much of our brain development happening, critical brain development, even prenatally, when your stress response system is online so often, and especially again within that family system, our brain, it's a different part of the brain that fight, flight, freeze is really active and reactive, and that's what's online most of the time, because the kid needs to survive. So it doesn't leave a lot of brain power, energy, time to really allow some of the other parts of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex, to really develop. The part of the brain where we have problem solving, where we're able to think about the consequence of our actions, when we're able to look to someone to help us calm down and regulate ourselves, having control over our emotions and behavior. So those are, even thinking things like sensory part of the brain and language development, all of those parts of the brain, the more a child especially has to be in survival mode part of the brain, the more reactive and stronger that part of the brain becomes, and the less we see development in these other really critical parts of the brain that help us with development later on and resilience later on too as adults.
Yeah. Wow. One of the most interesting parts of what, you know, everything that you guys just talked about, I think is kind of the science behind some of these things and the brain chemistry. And I don't know, you guys have visited the exhibit itself, I'm guessing. But, you know, parts of the exhibit talk about how historically we've kind of dealt with mental illness or not dealt with it. And so I'm guessing some of these discoveries are fairly recent. Is that the case? And are we still learning more about how child's brains are developing and how these traumas can affect children in their development? Is that true?
I would say we still have a lot to learn. I think we know a lot, especially within the last couple of decades. I think there's been a lot of time, research, and effort put in to really understand the science behind it, understand this not just as a mental health issue, but as a public health crisis, really, especially with the rates and the impact that Steph was talking about as well. But I will say even just the conference a lot of us just attended, seeing some of the new research coming out that confirms a lot of what we do already know, but also is tapping into some of the maybe newer things that we don't quite understand. Or we talk about complex trauma is complex for a reason. And so there's so many facets and avenues to really discover and understand. And it impacts every person differently. There's not like a very simple roadmap of impact. There's a lot of areas we look at that often get impacted, but it's different for every single person. And so I think the more that we can do the research, the more that we can fund that research, and really make that research representative, right? Like a lot of the research out there is based on children of a certain income level or of a certain race or ethnicity. A lot of focus on white children, or when there's focus on Black children, that there is sometimes we're seeing a lot of bias, a lot of misrepresentation, and then a lot of not as much representation for kids who identify as transgender, kids who identify as Native American. So just thinking about, we've come a long way, and I think there's still a lot that we can do in the side of research to really understand fully more about the impacts of trauma and resilience.
Yeah, that's great. So I wanted to ask about, what are some common signs of trauma in children? And let's say, I work at the museum, I see a lot of children, or if I'm an educator, or, someone that's not directly in a relationship with that child, but has interactions with that child. What are some signs that might point to some of these traumas?
We look at, I would say, usually what people see first or quickest with the kids we work with is when they have externalizing behaviors. So externalizing behaviors could be rule-breaking behaviors, really struggling with authority, really hard to redirect them or get them to focus and pay attention. It might look like aggression towards other people or towards themselves. It might look like having fits and getting, I've had kids run away, run around. So sometimes those big behaviors, because I think they're sometimes more easily noticeable by professionals, especially in certain settings, is one aspect of it that we see. But then we definitely see a lot of kids with more internalizing behaviors. And we want to look out for those too, but they might not be as in your face as some of the externalizing behaviors. So those internalizing things might look like a kid who's more shut down, withdrawn. It might even start looking like depression or anxiety. Some of the kids we work with, some of those internalizing behaviors, the way that they've managed to deal with trauma is through dissociation. So kind of separating between mind and body. So we'll see kids who are really checked out, who it's really hard to stay focused and in the present moment because their brains are dissociating as a trauma response. What else, Steph? What am I missing?
And sometimes, the trauma can kind of present relationally as well. So when kids have had, past experiences where adults haven't been safe for them, then keeping adults, keeping their distance, challenges with trust, or, whether sometimes for kids it can present as feeling scared of men or feeling scared of women or whatever that might look like. And because their experiences has taught them that those people may not be safe for them. And so their brain is going to figure out whatever protective way it can to keep them safe. And so whether that is keeping people away or, verbally being aggressive or being really shy or whatever that might look like, those kind of protective behaviors can come out.
Or sometimes even kind of the opposite too. We'll see kids who really need the complete attention 24/7, need to be close, very close, touching, sleeping in the same room with caregivers, because there's some of that relational piece. When mental health, we see a lot of mental health, mental illness symptoms as well. Suicidality and self-harm, unfortunately, is a pretty common sign of a kid who's gone through complex trauma. Even some of that substance use as a way to cope, I often see with our teenagers and adults too. So those are, and a lot of the kids that we see have a lot of these different symptoms, or even things like memory loss, like difficulties with memory. Trauma can impact that part of the brain. So a kid might really have a hard time with some of those more executive functioning, the prefrontal cortex parts of the brains I was talking about before, that problem solving, some of those pieces too.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And so is it possible to heal completely from childhood trauma? And what does that process look like for a lot of people?
So I guess I'll make kind of a analogy. So I don't know if you ever go hiking and there's the path, and it's like a pretty well-worn path, but then sometimes you'll see where like a path has diverged and somebody has like walked a path that's not exactly the regular path, the social path, you might call it.
A social trail, exactly.
Social trail. And so, when you think about, when we see kids, the impact of trauma, so the impact on behaviors, these, externalized behaviors, internalized behaviors, they're all like ways that their brain has tried to figure out to manage. So, they're normal reactions to being put in an abnormal situation, right? So brain is just trying to figure out, how do I make sense of this? How do I deal with, how do I keep myself safe? And so their brain has kind of had this like well-worn path. It's built this social trail that might be different than the regular path, but it's built this, this path that it, like the kid has walked down. So its brain has dissociated, or its brain goes into fight mode or goes into flight mode, runs away. And that is what has kept that kiddo safe. And, as they can have positive correcting experiences, start to walk down a new path and stamp down a new path, these corrective experiences of having adults that care about them, who love them unconditionally, even when the big behaviors come out, or having opportunities to be successful and to lean into their strengths, or, really working on building positive kind of coping strategies or skills in regulation. Like all of those kind of things can start to build a new pathway in their brain, can start to build the new path. The old path still is there, so like it starts to kind of grow over a little bit. And the more they walk the new trail, the more that becomes the trail that they're on. Then the old path starts to grow over a little bit, but it's still there. And so think about like a new stressor coming in, for example, a pandemic, or, a set of fires in their neighborhood, or, a new school, or whatever that is. Sometimes our brain will hop back onto the old path just because it's been so well worn, even though we're starting to kind of walk this new path or heal, and that one's starting to kind of grow over. Something, can kind of kick it back onto this old path. But with enough of these positive correcting experiences, and the more you kind of wear that new pathway into the brain, the more the brain is going to go to that one when the new stressor comes in. And so, that's kind of how we think about it. It's these positive correcting experiences, and really thinking about, like a compassionate way to think about that old path has served that kid or adult so well because it has kept them safe, and it's their brain's way of kind of being protective and keeping them safe in an abnormal situation. So the more you can kind of help them move over and develop this new path, the more that the brain is going to go to that.
It often takes a lot of time, like Steph is saying, to build that. It takes a lot, has to do with environment. So you might have heard the word trigger, like a trauma trigger. And a lot of times that's occurring in the environment or in our interactions. And so kids might get triggered, like Steph's talking about, where they jump back onto that old path and kind of react from that trauma mode. And there's a lot of times where the kids we work with might not even know what that trauma trigger was. And so we talk a lot with parents and caregivers and professionals about how do we create a trauma-informed and really healing-centered environment? How can we help promote safety in our interactions with kids and with people who've gone through trauma? How can we present enough times over and over, repetition of a safe environment, a safe relationship that will eventually, over time, get their brain to really recognize, like, I'm not in that trauma environment anymore. I can be safe now in order to build that new path. But it's really hard to do that when you're still in a trauma environment or have some of these ongoing traumas, like a pandemic going on in the background, where we can see kind of these triggers or these times where kids will kind of regress and just need some support to get back on that new path. And the other thing we talk about with complex trauma is that complex trauma is all about relational trauma. So trauma that's happened in relationship. The best way to heal that is through healthy, supportive relationship. And so again, going back to relationship and how can we help either heal and repair some of these relationships that have had trauma in them, and then build new relationships with people. And that can be hard with a kid with trauma, where a lot of their protective behaviors are saying, people, I can't trust you.
Right.
You know, like push away or build up the wall. But there are ways that if you take the time, if you can come at it with some compassion and understanding of that, these brain-based behaviors, that I think people can really create very meaningful relationships with kids and families. And that we talk a lot about that being your biggest tool as a professional, as a person who cares about other people and kids and works with kids. Your relationship, helping a kid feel safe and just being a consistent support for that person, following through with what you've said. You've done. A lot of our kids have had broken trust in relationship, and so it seems like small things, but keeping your word, being consistent, allowing them to be themselves. Those are things that are going to teach a child who's gone through trauma that they can start to trust, that they can have a relationship that can be different than what their brain recognizes as true for the world. And so that's where we start to see some of that healing. And that's the hope that we have, is we know from the research that our brains can rewire. The earlier we do it, the more preventative we can be about it, the better. And even through adulthood, we know that we can rewire the brain, and healing is possible through that. It takes time and support, but it is possible.
That's great. So you both mentioned the pandemic, our current situation, our current shared trauma, if you will. Can you talk a little bit about how your work has been perhaps impacted by the pandemic, and maybe even some of the broader effects that you might be seeing in your field due to the pandemic?
Yeah. And the pandemic's one that it's an ongoing stressor, right? That's in, like you said, a shared community trauma. And that we're all going through this, but we might be at different levels of being able to cope with it, right? But that I think it's different than something like say 9/11, where you have a horrible, tragic day that happened, and of course the long-term and short-term effects of that. But it happened in that day. With something like a pandemic that's been going on almost a year, we don't know when it will end. There's fluctuations on safety measures and what we're supposed to do. That kind of stress can really have an ongoing impact and make it really hard to practice the skills that we need to manage, to connect with people, right? Like that's been such a hard thing during this pandemic that I think we've all noticed, is that connection with our community, with our people, is so important. And that piece is really lacking. So I think the piece with this pandemic especially is just we don't know when it's going to end. We don't know all the specific solutions. And we talk about a lot of times it's really difficult to heal when you're in the midst of crisis. So it's really hard to do some of that active work in the midst of ongoing crisis. And that's what we're in. And I know, again, everyone's at a different level with that and different impacts of it, but that's a little bit of what we're seeing. And again, not just for our clients, but for ourselves as well. And we talk a lot about how do we manage secondary traumatic stress, which is something that happens in our job, and working with trauma, or even just wanting to help somebody, even if it's not your job, wanting to help someone who's gone through something difficult. You can have those effects of secondary trauma. So as a professional working in this field, or even as a parent or someone, whoever working with kids, that it's harder to even manage our own regulation and practice. We might be practicing all the coping skills that used to work, and might not always be working the same way, because this is a different kind of complex community trauma, like we talked about. Yeah. And I guess, I mean, it has shifted, thinking about how it shifted our work too. One thing that I guess a neat thing that has come out of it is we never thought we'd be able to do something like online assessments. And in a matter of fact, we can do online assessments. And we have been able to, as safety measures, start to go back to some in-person work as needed. But it has been really interesting to shift our assessment model to the online format and be able to offer that service even with the restrictions of COVID. So it has kind of forced us, like a lot of organizations and agencies out there, to figure out how do we adapt, right? Because when we talk about trauma and resilience, it's about adaptation. And so when thinking about our organization and our assessments, how can we adapt to this to continue to serve our community and our clients in a way that makes sense right now?
And it's kind of, I think, having the ability to do assessments online to see kids and families over a screen, it also allows us to see kids and like outside of Larimer County who we might not otherwise have been able to see, So we've been seeing kids who aren't just up in Fort Collins or in the Denver metro area who would sometimes drive to us. And so, kids in outlying areas or in rural areas where they can't kind of get to our centers. So I think that, as whenever things go back to normal, or if not, whatever that looks like, we don't know.
What is normal anyways?
Yeah, what is exactly? Well, I think we'll continue to do this because it really allows us to broaden, particularly like geographically, the population that we can see at CTRAC, which I think is a good benefit. And then I think, also, we do a lot of work with teenagers, and they're like, they're so virtual now that for some of the kids that we work with, they actually prefer to interact with a mental health professional over a screen. Like they just kind of, it works for them. So we've also seen for some of the, the teens that we work with, particularly, that like being over screen actually feels better for them to have some distance. And then, also they like engaging in therapy in that way too. So and for some it really works.
They're in their environment, they're in their home. For some of our kids, that actually is really hard, right? That their home might be full of trauma or not a lot of privacy, or so we really have to keep that safety piece in consideration. But like Steph said, a lot of the teenagers, especially, and some of our adult clients too, seem to feel a little bit more comfortable in some ways. Like I think because a lot of times with trauma, what happens is you lose a sense of control. You really lose that sense. And even though we do as much as we can to create a trauma-informed environment, we, from the way we dress to sitting on the floor, making sure we use low lights and not blocking the door and having fidgets and snacks and all these things that we're trying to do to make a safe environment, at the end of the day, it's up to that client to determine, does this really feel safe? And a lot of times clients can at first feel anxious coming into something like our assessment and might feel a little nervous or, and so I think that that's been one of the benefits that I hadn't expected of some clients just being able to feel a little bit more regulated, feel a little bit more comfortable because they're in their space and able to connect over a screen than actually coming to our center too.
That is super interesting. Yeah, I this program that we're doing right now is kind of our reaction as well. And it has been kind of cool as a museum to be able to do these programs and broadcast them online to, who knows who's watching out there in the world, but to really expand our reach in that way and continue to kind of serve the community through doing that. It's been kind of a cool silver lining almost, but yeah. So I wanted to talk specifically about the work that you guys do at CTRAC and what the assessment process is and who it's for and just all that kind of stuff. So maybe we can just start with, what does CTRAC do? What do you offer as a service to the community?
Yeah, so we do what we call a trauma and resilience assessment. Is kind of the biggest portion of the work that we would do, I think, would be a trauma and resilience assessment. So CTRAC has been offering trauma and resilience assessments in the community for 6 or 7 years now, Chelsea?
I think 5 or 6 now. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we'll say 6 between the two of us. And that's something that we should probably know. So we've been doing what we call a trauma and resilience assessment for 6 years now at CTRAC, and really the focus of the assessment is all about understanding the impact of a child's experience. And so when we first started doing assessments 6 years ago, we were only seeing kids, and really our primary referral source for kids coming in to see us is coming from Larimer County Child Welfare. And so all of the kids that we were seeing at that point were coming from child welfare. The assessment process really is all about kind of trying to understand all of these areas that we've talked about that can be impacted. So, kids' relationships, kids' regulation, kids' brain development and cognitive abilities, their executive functioning, like their view of the world, all of those kind of things is what we're trying to understand. And so, when we work with kids, we let them know we're not investigators coming in to kind of understand the events that have happened. We're not, that's not our role, is to dig into like, what are the events of trauma? Because a lot of the kids that we work with have had like forensic investigations about their trauma. But we're really focused on trying to understand how have the things that have happened changed things for you? And then also, what are those resilience factors? So like, really, that's our goal, is to figure out those two pieces. And also just to give the child voice, like to give them the chance to share what they think the impact is, because often kids who are in the child welfare system have had a lot of adults talking for them and have a lot of adults saying, here's what's going on for you. Here's what you need to be doing. And we're kind of our take on it is, you're the expert on you, and as the expert on yourself, like, help us understand, teach us a little bit about what's going on and what you hope for yourself. And if we can advocate for those things for you and really highlight the things that are going well, highlight the things that are still challenging, and help, together make a plan for what can be most helpful in supporting your resilience. Like, that's our goal when we can have a partnership with the child and a partnership with the family and kind of co-create the whole process and assessment piece together.
And so some of the pieces that we do in an assessment, so especially we typically work with youth ages 4 to 17, but we have recently started doing adult assessments as well, which has been really exciting. But one of the things, so we're just trying to build that relationship, help them feel comfortable. We start out with some cognitive testing. It's not the full-fledged comprehensive, like an IEP testing kind of thing, but just a couple of screeners just to look at things like intelligence, language fundamentals. And it's also really a way to join with the kids, kind of get to know them a little bit. They take surveys for us. So depending on their age, they'll take a couple different surveys looking at trauma symptoms, areas of resilience, mental health in different ways, executive functioning, a lot of different pieces. Depending on age, the parents will also, or caregivers will take some surveys as well. And we do the psychosocial interview with the youth, which is another way that we can get at some of these impact areas and resilience areas. For little kids, it looks like play, a lot of play, a lot of drawing, a lot of imagination, and just trying to pick up on themes, pick up on, can they identify emotions? Can they teach us through their play? A lot of times that's how kids communicate. So we'll do a lot of that with the younger kids. For some of the older kids and the teenagers, we'll have a big whiteboard with us and just talk about, like, you know, you can say as much or as little about the actual details of experiences, but in your perspective as the expert, as the client, what have been some of those significant events? And we don't have to stay on the events. I'm really more curious, how have those things impacted you? How have they impacted things like relationships, things like your emotions, your ability to identify what's going on for yourself? So we do a lot of different activities on the whiteboard through discussion. And really what we're trying to do is, one, obviously understand their perspective in these areas that Steph talked about, but we're also trying to help them by writing it out on the whiteboard, is also sort of helping them have not a timeline, but almost a narrative of kind of what has happened. A lot of trauma really jumbles up memories and impacts them. And so you'll see us drawing a lot of arrows on the whiteboard, connecting different things, different pieces, asking, is that similar to this over here? And is that actually connected to this over here? And really kind of diving into some of that and helping. I've had a lot of clients, kids and adults, say at the end, like, man, I feel like, you know, I know my story, but seeing it this way, or seeing how these things connect, I've just never kind of been able to talk about it in the same way. It's not the same as therapy, although it's therapeutic. I think it just, like Steph said, allows them to have a voice, have a really try to understand them in a different way. We do also, with permission, do interviews with caregivers, teachers, therapists, coaches, anyone who's an important person. Really try to make this a comprehensive assessment and understand how is this youth showing up in these different environments, especially when we do the testing. Like, maybe we need to recommend some IEP testing get done through the school. And so what we'll do after that assessment, after we've learned all that we can, is we'll put it together in a report. So put our findings in a report, and the biggest piece of that report is those recommendations. So we'll sit down and meet with the youth and the family. We check in with the youth if they're old enough. Did we get this right? Do you have questions about this, right? And did we get your story correct? And then we'll go into, here's some ideas that we think, whether it's family therapy, or maybe you mentioned that you'd love to play soccer, but you've never gotten a chance to do it on a team. Let's get you involved in a sport on a team that can really, so we're trying to get creative. So it's not all therapy, because that's definitely helpful and healing. And what are some of those other things that a kid and a family can do to support resilience? So the result is this report with recommendations. But hopefully bigger than that is a client's ability to feel like they've been able to share, that they've been able to make new connections, get connected to new services or resources in the community that they hadn't thought about before. Really helping teams. We work a lot with the team. So at those meetings, we'll first meet with the families and kid. Well, then we'll have their caseworker come in. If they want to invite their therapist or a teacher or a grandparent to come in and support, like, we'll have these big team meetings where people are feeling stuck. And how can we just take a trauma-informed approach to understanding these behaviors as brain-based, and then how can we support through some of these recommendations?
So often we find that once kids can kind of make that connection between the things that have happened to them and some of the things that are going on for them, or their behaviors, or whatever that is, and it's built such a sense of self-compassion, you know, around things that, you know, the behaviors can sometimes feel really challenging or really hard, but like and even the parents or the teams can also build that same compassion. And once you kind of have compassion and you have an understanding of how the pieces fit together, that really changes stuff for a kid. It changes stuff for the way people treat them, the way they treat themselves, and just their understanding of themselves. So that piece can be really cool too.
And really normalizing. I mean, like Steph said, you're adapting these behaviors and symptoms are survival adaptations from abnormal situation. And so a lot of times we'll talk about, you know, some kids tell me that when they feel depressed, that they might shut down, or they might hurt themselves, or they might hide or run away or isolate. Do any of those fit for you? How does that fit for you? And so I feel like kids and clients have also shared that it has felt like I'm not alone in this, that this is, it makes sense for what I have gone through. And there is a way, a path forward, a way to shift, a way to heal you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Oh, I was just going to say, and I think the thing is, at the end of the day, what we hope that kids and families walk away with is a sense of hopefulness for their future. That there's hopefulness for healing, hopefulness for rebuilding relationships, for, all of those kind of things, the ability to achieve goals in the future. And so that's really our whole hope, is that, kids and families can walk away just feeling like they can see that resilience piece, and that they feel hopeful for things to be different.
Yeah, and just wrapping around with that community support, like, again, that you're not alone in this, right? And it's hard, and it's going to be a hard path forward. But I mean, I've had kids say, other kids have said this to you. They have told you this same thing, or other parents have dealt with this same. Because I think a lot of times these trauma behaviors and reactions bring a lot of shame. That's a really big emotion, and can be a really toxic emotion for people, right? That feeling of shame can just add to the trauma impact and add to that negativity. So when you can say you're not the only kid who has, and yes, you might have experienced something different, or it maybe has different impacts for you, but you're not alone in this, and you're going to have community support moving forward. I think that's the other piece that really gets into that hopefulness that we want.
Awesome. That's great. And we've just got a few minutes left here. Actually, it's already been almost an hour, which is amazing. It's been so much, so interesting talking to both of you. But why don't we wrap up and just tell me, who exactly is CTRAC for, and how can people find more information about CTRAC? And if it's mainly for, local Fort Collins, Larimer County, are there other resources that people can look to find resources in their own local areas that you might know of? That was a lot of questions in one, but
we'll try to do it. Let's try to tag team this to make sure we get them all answered. So find us on the web, on our website. If you Google CTRAC, CSU, Colorado State, you'll find us. We have a website. I don't know the exact web address. Chelsea, maybe you do. I probably should also know that.
Actually, I'll put it in the comments.
Wonderful.
So, yeah.
If you Google CTRAC at CSU, it should be the first
You'll
thing.
find us.
Yeah.
But so, assessments are really the heart of what we do, but we also offer community training, and that can be open to anybody in the community to attend those trainings. So every other month we do a live webinar type of training. We call it a Trauma 101. So basically it just gives a basic foundational training around the impact of trauma and resilience, how you can support kids who've experienced trauma in whatever role you may play in a child's life. And then also how can we build kind of connections in our community to have a more resilient community. And so anybody is welcome to join those trainings that we offer. And so those are really the big resources that we have to offer in the community. We also offer other trainings. If you work in an organization who would like a specific training for us to come in and train your organization, we can do that. We offer a training around secondary traumatic stress for other folks who work in helping professions who may be impacted by the work that they do. We offer trainings and organizational assessments to support organizations who are also doing this work, because it does have an impact on us. It's natural and normal that would impact us. Chelsea?
Yeah, and some of our you can see at our website a list. Some of them are have a cost associated, but some of them we do have a SAMHSA grant. So SAMHSA is the Substance Abuse Mental Health Association
Administration. Yeah.
Thank you. We got a grant with them. So through that grant, we are able to provide some free trainings, and then we do have prices listed on our website for others. as well. We also do consultation, and so we can do trauma consultation with a family or two. Like if they are not able to do a full assessment and want to do a consultation with us, we're able to do that. We have a great partnership with our Larimer County Department of Human Services and some of the other counties in our area as well. And so we do consultations with them, run groups, resilience groups for caseworkers over there, have thought about running some more professional resilience groups as well and expanding that. Sorry, go ahead, Steph.
Oh, I was going to say, and also, you know, as on our website as well, we offer a list of resources. If you are interested in learning more about trauma and resilience, we have books and websites and videos that you can watch. All of those are on our website in the resources tab, and you can go on there and kind of just figure out kind of what you want to learn. And there's all sorts of resources available to kind of learn more about the things that we've talked about in more depth.
A big one is nctsn.org. That's the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. So nctsn.org. We've got links to some of their stuff on our website as well, but that's a really big one with really good free resources, guides, webinars, trainings, all kinds of things like that. And then I'll say if anyone's interested in assessment, so we do primarily work with both children and now adults who have experienced complex trauma. And so things like abuse, neglect, separation of parents, even just being in the foster system is a trauma. But it could also be other things going on as well within that family system. So most of our youth do come from the Department of Human Services or have cases with child welfare. So if you know a family who's involved with child welfare, especially Larimer County, they can ask their caseworker to get them connected for an assessment with us. If you don't have a case open with child welfare, we are able to still do assessments. Just cost and different things like that might vary, but still feel free to reach out. Our information is on the website. And so if you have questions about assessment, if you qualify for assessment, cost, like anything like that, just feel free to reach out. We'll answer any and all of those questions that people might have. Oh, and I will say, if you are a student at CSU, we do have undergraduate internship and graduate. We primarily work in the HDFS department, but open for undergraduate internship in a lot of departments, and the marriage and family therapy and social work graduate students do a lot of training and work with us as well.
Well, excellent. I think you answered all parts of my long questions. So awesome. And we're right on time. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you both for being on the program. It was so amazing to get to hear about the work that you guys are doing, as well as just to learn a little bit more about these childhood traumas and the effects that they can have, but also the path to healing that we can have in this situation as well. So thank you so much. I hope you have a good rest of your evening, and perhaps we'll see you around again at some point in the future.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, Ben. It's been really lovely to be here with y'all tonight.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Excellent. All right. And for everyone out there watching, thank you so much for tuning in to Discovery Live Ask an Expert. If you want to tune in again, we are doing these quite a bit. You can check our website. I think the next one is going to be next Wednesday as well. Again, mental health themed. And if you have not been to the Museum of Discovery yet to see the exhibit, Mental Health Mind Matters, I highly encourage you to do so. The museum is actually free right now, and so there's no cost to visit the museum, as well as to check out this exhibit and learn a little bit more about the issues around mental health and destigmatizing the conversation around mental health. And once again, if you enjoyed tonight's program, we do ask that you consider supporting the museum. You can visit our website at fcmod.org/donate to do that. Or if you're watching on Facebook Live, just clicking the little donate button down below. Any amount that you can give, we highly appreciate. So thank you once again for tuning in, and we will see you all same place next week. Bye.